I genuinely love the work that we get to do, and it's so challenging and so chaotic, but so satisfying. And all day I'm talking to some of the most incredible humans who are navigating some of the most complex challenges of lived experience, but then organisations and people that are leading pathways out of that. I'm working with a team of extraordinary humans who care so unbelievably deeply. I've also built my life to be...
What if you're the kid who could not sit still or stay quiet? Who challenged every teacher, told a few of them where to go, and left school with a score of 56. A quiet belief that you had failed the people who loved you most. That was Odette Barry, 2 older sisters who topped their year level, parents who deeply cared about and invested into her education, and report cards that told her year after year that she was just not good enough.
Then something turned. The very thing school kept punishing, her refusal to accept the way things are, became the fuel and engine of her whole career and path. Today, she runs her own PR agency, helping charities and change makers push back against the status quo. In this conversation, Odette shares how her demons became her gift, why being seen matters more than any mark or score, and how she parents a son who is nothing like her. Welcome to this episode of More Than a Score.
More awkward than listening to someone read out your bio or a blurb about you and you're like, but I'm stoked. I'm stoked.
You can keep your face down if you would like to, whatever you want, but for the people listening, Odette Barry, warm, effervescent, genuine, unfiltered. A leader, supporter, champion of building up others. A community builder, fun-loving, people person who's interested in stories and actually helping others. From boost juice blending to building a media relations and PR business over the last 10 years, a lover of learning, gift of the gab, mum of one, Odette Barry, welcome to More Than a Score.
Oh, geez, that was pretty lovely.
I saw some wry smiles just then as we were doing that too.
Yeah. Oh my God. All the things. That's very, very kind words. I really appreciate it. It's very nice.
Well, it's all based on the research and the reading and also the work that we've done sort of getting to know you as well. But I think if you've listened to our other episodes, the starting question we kick off with is when you think back to the end of your time at school, were you happy with your score?
Yes. Yeah, I've actually really loved listening to the pod and I think probably also feeling somewhat validated through the similarities in lots of the stories and also just like even if you do well, the frustration that people feel as well. Yeah, I remember, I think my mum called me and she was like, are you going to open this fucking envelope? And I was like, last thing I wanted to. I don't think I'd been home for 3 days. I'd been out working and partying and just doing everything in my power to avoid the reality because I had this like soul-crushing fear of disappointing my parents, even though there would be 0% surprise in anything that was uncovered in that envelope. I think in terms of the effort that was put in, the result was very fair. I think I got like 56 or something like that, but I also had such a low sense of self that I think there was like a level of mortification as well coming through. I think like the biggest thing for me was that my parents spent so much money on my education, and really the biggest thing that they valued in life was education. And I felt like it was a slap in the face to them that I was who I was, and that was the result that they were gifted back with.
The word mortification is a really strong word there. And it sounds like there was a lot of tensions between the effort, knowing that it sounds like there was some pressure to do well. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mortification, if that's okay?
Yeah. Well, I guess like for context, I don't think my parents explicitly applied pressure. It was more implicit based on the fact that, I have 2 older sisters who both got 96.55 for their inter score.
I love that the score.
Exactly the same. And When I was in grade 3, I applied to go to St. Michael's, and part of that was to apply for a scholarship, and both of my sisters had received scholarships. I didn't get one. And I think growing up knowing that my parents paid the most for my education was like, my parents worked bloody hard. They were, a school teacher and a pilot. They weren't really comfortable with the fees of that education. And so I think that was just a very, very real constant tension the whole way through my education, of being aware of what my parents were sacrificing for my education. So that mortification, I think, was just like the sum total of lack of gratitude. And yet it was that the shoe didn't fit more than anything.
But was it perceived lack of gratitude in your perspective? Like, it wasn't that you weren't, my understanding of what you're saying is it wasn't that you weren't grateful for the opportunity. It's just that it wasn't the right opportunity. Is that correct?
I was pretty ungrateful. I was,
right. Okay.
Yeah, I was a turd. Like, I was a fully qualified, paid up member of Nightmare teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I packed up my locker and told teachers to get fucked multiple times throughout my education. I told my parents I wanted to leave the school from about grade 5 onwards. And all I wanted was to go to the local school, have local friends, and not have the burden of what that financial pressure was. But also, I think, it's tricky when, I don't know, what we call that these days is like a challenge with authority and ADHD. There's like diagnoses for these things that like make these kind of behaviors make sense. But I think like the hard part was that, my mum was a school teacher. She was so passionate about education. Like, we went to Montessori kindergartens. She wanted to homeschool us, but she had to work. So, put every dollar that she earned into education. So I think the lack of gratitude I was very aware of, but I also just didn't know how to change it.
And knowing what you know about yourself, and then even the things around like, different ways brains work, what do you think might have helped you be a little bit more grateful? Or maybe like sometimes pull yourself out, when you're deep in that teenage time where you're trying to push against authority, you're purposely supposed to go against boundaries and, explore and all of that. But knowing what you know now, what do you think might have helped you or someone right now that's going through that?
Well, I guess like having a 18-year-old son now, I've actually been gifted with the opportunity to have that catharsis of reparenting yourself through the process. And obviously the pendulum tends to swing a little too far sometimes. But, my advice to any of my friends going through this chapter of life is to listen to your kids and trust them. And I know that's really hard when there's so much evidence that says don't trust them. And I certainly gave my parents a lot of motivation not to trust me. But there is some real power in co-design and giving agency. And if someone has problem with authority, then giving them a sense of control, I think, has some very real, meaningful results. But, it's easy for me to reflect back and say, well, if the other path had been taken and I had been given agency, then maybe things might have been different. But also maybe they would have been a whole lot fucking worse, Like I who knows, really?
Yeah. So when you're at school, you said you were not as engaged, but there were some parts that you did love. What were the parts that you loved about school? So to help the listener really get an understanding of where you've come from before we move on to the next stages.
Yeah, well, like an absolute chatterbox by nature. And so the social side of school was really fun. I loved hanging out with my mates every day and always thought it was just so lucky that you got to go to this place to hang out with your mates. Obviously, that has some challenges when you are also sitting in classrooms where you're not allowed to talk to your friends. So that did result in a lot of time on detention. But I loved a lot of the subjects that I did. Like I did photography, I did food technology, I did a lot of like creative courses and really, really enjoyed them. I just didn't do any of the homework.
What was your reputation by the end of year 12? You can speak about it from a peer perspective or a school perspective. It's up to you. What was your reputation?
I would say probably a pain in the ass. Probably on social and school side, to be honest. I feel like because I didn't have a lot of self-discipline skills, that was executed in a social landscape and in a educational landscape. Yeah, I think I was a fucking nightmare is probably how most people would describe me.
Well, you described yourself as an intellectual outcast, and I'm wondering what it was at the school that made you feel like that. Because as you said, like you actually enjoyed the subjects, you had an issue with authority. What made you such an outcast in an intellectual capacity?
Well, I think when you are getting report cards that tell you you've failed year after year after year, it does start to become a core belief. So I remember when I was really little, my granddad used to always say, this one's like really clever about me. And I was just always like, I don't believe that, you know, like I no part of my soul believed that. And it's really not been really until coming into my like later 30s that I've started to understand what I have to offer.
Odette, what is it that you have to offer, if that's all right to ask about that? Because that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I guess probably that opposition to authority is like the core DNA of my work now, in that I think that I'm really good at grappling with challenging ideas and creating space for that in mainstream narratives. So we work with a lot of not-for-profits and social change makers who are lobbying government for more funding for support services or working across vulnerable communities and need to get funding or community understanding. And they're very well-established issues that people know exist and just don't have time, space or capacity to engage with because this is the world we operate in. And so I think a lot of the things that were my demons have become the gift that I get to bring to the work that I do.
Yeah, and push back against the status quo. And especially if there's just an accepted belief or way of doing it, you're actually leaning into that ability to question and say, hang on, well, why does this have to be that way?
Yeah, I'm allowed to be a professional nightmare now.
I want to, if it's okay, I want to go back to the fact that you said you left the letter for the end of school for 3 days, doing all the parties. And oh my gosh, I remember at the end of high school people doing results parties, and I definitely avoided those because that just felt so full on.
It was a strange time.
Strange time.
Yeah.
But so you finally open up the letter, and based on what you've said, from grade 3, there was a feeling of pressure to be the same as your sisters. There was this implicit pressure to perform. You're getting feedback from reports that you're not performing in the right sort of way. You're getting these social things where you've got this great skill to question and challenge being shut down. You then open up the letter. You get this score for this thing. Talk us through the moments after that when you see it. You spoke about that mortification, but just what comes next over that, like the summer holiday? What do you do after that, after you open the letter and you see the score and it all ends?
Well, I think my mum opened a letter and rang me and told me the results because I wasn't engaging with it. And I can remember I was working at Boost Juice and I was sitting upstairs at Swanston Street in Melbourne, and one of my girlfriends who worked there as well was like, oh, you got like 2 points more than me. And it was just like such a gift to be with someone who was just like, you know, like it was just not a thing. It was at that period of time, I didn't really know people who weren't applying themselves. You know, like every culture of the school was very much of excellence and pushing you to perform. And so to be within the vicinity of someone who I deemed to be a very good human, who I really loved, and I had unwittingly, gone in a similar path to them. And it's funny, working at Boost Juice, like the weight that I give to my time spent at Boost Juice is like nothing short of delightfully cathartic and healing, like to work there. Like I often talk to people about like it was the first time in my life that I had genuinely felt like I had value and that like I had something that I could be good at. And I fucking loved that job with my whole heart. Like absolutely adored it. I got like, a solid $6.05 an hour for the first year.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because to work at a Boost Juice in one of those those fast food areas or, chain is there have to be systems, procedures, processes, hierarchy. You have to follow and respond to authority. So what was it that Boost Juice gave you at that job that school didn't?
Well, I mean, it was fucking loud. There was like hyped up music 24/7. There was systems and processes that were easy for my brain to follow. There was a culture of fun and vibrancy and, everyone was just having a good time. And also I was rewarded for my work, like I was promoted to a team leader very quickly. I was given responsibility, but it was fun. Like that was the biggest thing.
Loz, is it okay if I ask one?
Yeah, you go.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So given that throughout all your time at school, you were getting report cards that fail, not good enough, and then suddenly you're in this world where it's like, hey, you're so great at this, we want to promote you. What is it that you think they saw in you that led to those promotions and that recognition?
Cheap labor. No, it was, it was an unwavering commitment. Like I was working about 40 hours a week outside of school hours by year 10. And I was on Chapel Street. I used to run down Chapel Street to Jam Factory, Boost Juice, and clock on by like 4 o'clock and get in trouble for not being there by 3:45. But, I would have given a leg to get there by 3:45. I would work open to close on Saturday and Sunday. And, it was unwavering commitment that they got from me. I would never say no to a shift. It was my happy place.
It sounds like they really trusted you too. Like it sounds like you were able to have some authority in that job. You were deemed reliable. You were getting this constant reward that how you were showing up in that job was valued. You were valuable. I was thinking about my part-time job. I worked at Safeway in the deli back in the day before it was Woolies. And it is an interesting place as, a 17, 18-year-old because there's so many people around your age from different places. You meet each other in a completely different playing field than education. And so, there's people that you see that you think are incredible and they're like, oh gosh, I got a 45 at my ATAR. I didn't care about it. You're like, what? But you're the team manager here. And so it's a real kind of like mind-blowing moment of, well, we really just only value one thing in schools, but look at what else is valued in the workplace.
Yeah. And I think for me, growing up in a reasonably sheltered environment that was reasonably monoculture, it was the first time I had contact with people knowingly that I could talk about class and what people's lived experience was. Like most people in my educational journey were in a pretty similar or they were well above our financial position. And, my friends were sending money to their parents to support their grandparents' healthcare. They were people that had grown up in vastly different circumstances. And it was a real awakening to my privilege because I'd always felt pretty hard done by being in such an affluent community. And I know that stinks and is super gross, but it is what you grow up around. And so I think that exposure to different sorts of people was really, really transformational for me.
It sounds like so your worldview got expanded. You suddenly saw, there's a lot of different things. But then also there's, I think it's Dr. Kristen Neff. She does work around self-compassion. Stick with me here, both of you. But the idea is, so the first step, in order for you to actually be more compassionate towards yourself, is you have to realize that other people are also going through, you're not alone.
Yeah.
So you're going through what others are going through. So that moment when that person said to you, oh, you got 2 points higher than me, you had this moment of, oh, there's others that have gone through this as well. And that sounds like that was sort of a helpful insight for you as well.
Yeah, and there's a different way to interpret this result too, by the sound of it.
Yeah, definitely.
You've paved the way for us. So for everyone listening, so it's really, really wonderful that we can hear this experience of quite a negative experience within school, but it hasn't stopped any form of success. And that's a really great thing.
Yeah.
The whole reason that this podcast actually exists. So if it's all right, I'll just do a little summary of the pathway. Please jump in if I get something wrong or if there's something missing as well. But so leaving school with relief, you're working at Boost Juice during that time, you're partying, you're enjoying some travel, so you're putting aside that $6.50 an hour, or might have been $8 an hour as you got promoted to then go travel. You get married at 21 and become a mum at 22. You start to then work in a bank. On the side, you decide during that 5 years of working in this bank, you thought, do you know what, I might start a side business, a fashion retail store on the side called Lo and Behold, great name. And then when you get experience to a couple of bosses who are both negative experiences, but also one who was a really influential experience for you, they said, Odette, you should really go engage in this study. And because of that one piece of that one statement, you then shift and start uni at 26. You do strategic communications, move into a couple of years working in that space before moving up north to Byron Bay, away from Melbourne, and start the business Odette & Co., which has been in existence now for the last 10 years.
Yeah, a wild ride.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to know, when you hear that journey, what are the key turning points within that pathway for you?
Yeah, it's funny just up the top, you mentioning that having a challenging time in the school system, but that not lasting. I think that's not true at all, because that has lasted very significantly, and it's cost me years and years and years of therapy and self-limiting behavior that has come as a marker of that experience. But when I separate from that, you know, there have been some incredible turning points that have, you know, been gifted to me by people that have come into my life to help support on the wild journey of life. But yeah, I think like the 18-year-old self didn't have any belief that this path was ahead.
I'd love to know, you talked about the bosses at the bank and one that was really negative and one that was really positive. I'm really interested in the good mentors that you've had and the impact of a good mentor.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I went into working at Westpac as a temp whilst I was pregnant with my son, and I was just doing, you know, admin things. And then I ended up going back there and offered was a role when after Tex was born. And that was a very precious 5-day fortnight, which, you know, going back 20 years, it was so hard to get part-time work as a mum. Like, it was hen's teeth. And so I held on to that for dear life. The first 4 years working at Westpac, I had a very difficult relationship with my manager. I think one part of that was an issue with authority. The other part was like chronic low self-confidence. And so setting myself up for failure a lot through being too afraid to try. And also, in a lot of respects, I think she gave me a lot of outs, knowing how low my confidence was, to not challenge me. And that really limited my growth and development. But I had the most extraordinary mentor come into my life when she went on maternity leave, Stephen Browning, and I will forever be grateful for what a transformational role he played in my life. And he was just fundamentally kind and encouraging and gave me the courage to believe in myself a little bit, not entirely. But he he was like, go back to uni, Odie. Like, there's every opportunity for you. And he also said, like Westpac will pay for you to go to uni. You can work part-time and study part-time. You can work full-time and study part-time, whatever you want. And I was so afraid of what would happen if I worked for my former boss that, again, once she came back from maternity leave, that I didn't want to stay there and study despite the, opportunity financially. But it was a great jumping off point. Like, he really gave me the wind beneath my wings to like apply for uni and go on that next step.
I'd love to know, you said that your insecurity manifested in certain behaviours. What did it actually look like in the job?
Well, I just didn't back myself to do anything and doubted absolutely everything I did. And I also would work until midnight in the office because I was trying so fucking hard to get things right, and then I'd still fuck them up and then, self-flagellate like a motherfucker to try and, like as you do. But also my boss knew I was so nervous in team meetings, so she would just skip over me and not let me talk in meetings and give me a permission slip to not do it, which meant that it never changed, which meant that every meeting I was still, on a knife edge, terrified that someone might ask me a question.
Really interesting. If you could replicate more, was it Stephen Browning or Steve Browning?
Steve Browning.
Steve Browning. If you could replicate more Steve Brownings, what would you say we need to make sure we definitely do more of? Because you've given us some insights into what not to do. And even that thing of being in the team meeting, right? It becomes a negative feedback loop where suddenly you get more anxious because of a thing, you build it up. So let's flip it. If someone's listening and they go, oh my gosh, that sounds like I really want to be kind, I want to be encouraging, but how might I be able to do that? How can we replicate and have more Steve Brownings?
Well, one thing I think is like deep listening and really sitting with people and carving out time. And I know as a parent and as a manager, people have such limited time and capacity for actually just sitting with people. And it's like that, having no agenda and just, getting to know someone. That I think is a real gift. But I think the other thing that was really significant with him was that he just encouraged me to open the scope of what was possible. So suggesting things that I personally thought were outside of my own reach. And I think there's so much power in telling someone that they could do something. And it's not that I don't think like other people hadn't suggested things. And it's hard to unpick the DNA of that in that moment. And there's like a level of being receptive enough to someone's advice. But I do think like giving people scope to think wider is such a gift, because it's like even if they don't go as far as your suggestion, they'll anchor themselves a little higher.
Yeah.
And it fits in with the big piece of work around hope theory is if people can get clear on a goal and then they can see options and then they actually feel like they've got the means to actually take action, so they've got agency, so they think they can go do it, well, there's increased hope, which improves motivation, which therefore improves their ability to actually continue to make progress. But it sounds like Steve Browning, what he did was he listened really deeply, took an interest in you, noticed some things that might be connected to you, and then shared them. So then you got this clarity of, oh yeah, I could go do strategic communications or I could go do university. That gave you some options to consider, and then you actually took the leap of faith and actually did it. I'm really fascinated to know though, Odette, and you strike me as a really confident person. Like I were chatting before we recorded, like we first spoke 10 years ago, and I remember at the time then you came across really confident. So I guess what have you discovered has helped you increase the confidence? And you gave some clues about talking to professionals to help you with that. But what have been the things that have helped you build up this confidence and move away from that identity you had from school?
It's really expensive.
Well, for anyone that's budget conscious.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like I always get that feedback that people think I'm confident, and it's really hard because I know that I unconsciously put myself forward to be perceived as confident when I know it's a bullshit mask. But there's like what the things are that exude confidence versus what's in there. I don't know what that is. And just a talkability, I think, is a thing. But I think ADHD medication has been really fucking helpful for, I think like helping cut through the noise.
I'm also interested to know, what are the internal things that you've seen? So knowing yourself now, what's different about you with your real confidence? So not just when I spoke to you first time 10 years ago, you sounded confident, as in like tone-wise, voice-wise. What are you now? What are your markers now that you know that you are genuinely more confident in yourself?
Well, I would say that I would probably normally every 3 months or so have a really existential crisis that would require, therapy or a lot of self-development tools to crawl out of the darkness. I would say in the last 3 years, we're probably at annually, which is a big, big difference. It's really hard to see successes that you have been part of as your own. And so a lot of people will be like, oh, these amazing things you've done in your business. And I'm like, well, there's no way I have done these without M, who is like my business partner, or my team who have contributed enormously. So I guess like the biggest marker of success for me is like seeing how my son has grown up and who he is. Like that's the biggest mirror, I think, for me to be like, yeah, that's like, I'm pretty wholeheartedly proud of who I am as a mother.
It's really interesting. Your achievement, your first achievement, number one, was about growing and contributing to this incredible family that you've built with your husband and your son. And you said that it's actually been your biggest revenge in a way too. Because I imagine at 21, 22, being the kind of kid that you were, I say this in inverted commas, but the reputation that you had to go off and get married and have a child so young, I'm sure that there were conversations around you about impulsivity, recklessness, are you making the right choice, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that those are right, but I'm imagining they're around you.
Yeah.
How did you know that was the right path for you? Because it sounds like you took it and you knew that was what you wanted to do with your life.
Yeah. Well, I guess like, I don't know what it's like for anyone else, but like when I met Chris, it was the first time in my life I'd felt safe and like really safe to be me and like to be the dickhead version of myself, to be the silliest version of myself and to be loved and like honored in that version of myself. So there was nothing to argue with. Like it was just logic. And also I feel like, as a bit of a dopamine hunter, you're looking for extremes. And that was an extreme difference to, I guess, what anyone else was doing in my life. And yeah, that safety was just, it was just such a piece of clarity for me. I don't know how to explain that other than it just felt really good and nothing felt better than that. And I think like to your point about like the comments, absolutely. There were so many people who were like, what are you doing? Like, this is insane. My mum was like, I always knew you would rebel against the system. I didn't expect you to do the least rebellious thing under the sun.
Yeah.
But I remember my friend's mum said, people that have kids young are just looking for love. And I was like, that really hurts, but it's so true.
Right.
I never really planned to be a young mum until I met Chris and I was like, lock this shit down. Let's have a baby. Tex was born 9 months and 5 days after we got married.
Wow.
And, like even now, it's funny the judgment that you receive becoming a young parent, because I don't know how many times you've been asked as parents, are you still with the partner, like still with the parent of your child? But that's the first question that people ask me when they find out that they're like, oh, you're too young to have a baby, or you're too young to have a school-age kid, or you're too young to have an 18-year-old. And then the next one is, are you still with the dad?
Given that Tex has just finished up school and now he's watched you over the last sort of 10 plus years create the thing that you've created, but also gone through this pathway, I guess, what do you think he's noticed or he is proud of with all that you've done?
It's a good question.
Oh, I feel like we have to get him on the podcast to answer that question. I mean, he's so generous in his support of what I do. He's so aware and encouraging and loves engaging in talking about the clients we're working on. And I would love one day for him to work in the business. I think he has such a social justice orientation, surprise, but he's so clever and considered. He's like the opposite of me in terms of like how he thinks about things. He really like deep thinker, exactly the same as Chris, my husband. They forgot to put my personality in with Tex, which is actually not a bad thing. But, like I could see him being in a policy role for us, like working on systems change. I mean, we're holding a client event tomorrow night and he's so happy and excited to come along,
So he is proud of the fact that you've created a thing that's helping people. It's challenging the norm. It's challenging the status quo, and that you're doing it with some pretty great people out there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's an explicit conversation we've had per se, other than like little moments where he might have a passing comment where he's like, oh, that's really cool.
Well, that's pretty big if a teenager says that's pretty cool to a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think our relationship is like something that I'm so unbelievably proud of. Like, and it is, he came out like that, but also he has always had such warmth and trust in us. And we've not had a difficult teenage season with him. It's been really, really fun to be his parent. He's such a receptive sponge to the things that we offer and the suggestions and ideas. I guess like for me, what I reflect on in our relationship is I've grown up with him. I didn't have a fully formed sense of who I was or like a fully clear idea of exactly how to do things. And I also grew up, thankfully, before social media was such a big thing and podcasts for parents. And I kind of really had to just do it intuitively. And so in some respects, I wish that I'd had a couple of podcasts to lean on. But it's been such a healing journey to have the relationship that we do have.
What are the 3 big things that you have constantly come back to in parenting that you think have been the most valuable?
Well, one thing that was really unlocked things for me was when I was 19, I met my husband, but I also met my mother-in-law, who has been an instrumental guide and mentor for me in my life. And I remember sitting outdoors in her back garden and telling her about how guilty I felt for, how I had been in school. And she was like, so you had a neurological rewiring that fundamentally changed the course of who you were, for which is something you had no control over. And it like that, I can just remember like having this mental image in that moment of this like universe and stars connecting and synapses rewiring. And that little bit of wisdom stayed with me the whole way through motherhood, in that like when terrible twos or tantrums or like, that chapter just being like, you are rewiring right now. This is not being done to me. This is the experience of growing and evolving. And the same thing with teenagehood. Like before Tex started to exhibit any sort of changes in puberty, we talked all the time about this radical change that was coming his way, that would change the way that he showed up, it would change the way he felt about us, it would change the way he wanted to communicate with us. And I said to him, our promise to you is to meet you in whatever energy you're in and not respond with anger, even if that's what you present to us. Like, we will keep showing up with love. And I think like that was something that I came back to all the time. He never really gave us pause or reason to need to like, you know, really execute that. There was probably one incident where I really had to like sit with him with firmer words, but like that was probably one of the most core things for us in raising him. The other thing was, you know, we had a real emphasis on letting him lead where he went with school. Surprise. And hilariously, he chose to go to a private school in year 7 of his own choice, but also he really struggled and he chose to leave that school, and we took that as his decision and switched schools. And I said to him when he switched schools, like, I just want you to trust that we've got your back on this decision, but I also want you to still commit to the experience, like enjoy the experience. And that was probably the last piece for me in terms of advice for like, you know, navigating school, was we wanted him to have fun. We wanted him to enjoy the experience. So, you know, choose subjects that are for fun and prioritize your social life and just get the most out of the experience. And he was so sad when school finished because he loved it so much.
So it sounds like keeping him informed, having some shared expectations between you, and being open, transparent, and honest. They kind of seem like the core values at the end. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe too honest sometimes. You know, like
oversharing.
Yeah, always. Always. But I think I look at who he is versus who I am. And, you know, it's really hard to parent a child that's not like you, because you're trying to serve on a platter the things you needed and they don't necessarily need the same things. And I would wager on reflection that he probably needed just a little bit more boundaries and clarity than we gave him, just based on the kind of person he is.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When we were doing I remember doing my teaching degree, and during that 4 years, we often used to talk about, they'd say the teacher in the room is the one that controls the atmosphere. Like, you're like the barometer, you get a sense of what's happening, but you actually control it. But we need to make sure that means we can also adjust it based on who's in the room. So it's that similar sort of thing. I've taken a similar approach as a dad, which is, I'm the adult in the room, so it's actually on me. A kid's going through a whole bunch of different things, developing. It's actually on me to work out how do I adjust so that they can actually be okay. And it's on me as the adult for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like being a parent of one, you can have one approach to parenting. You know, I look at my friends who have multiple children and I just think, holy shit, what a beast. Because the amount of like time and thought you apply to a single child is, you know, you can really think deeply about what you want to do. But I really admire how my peers show up for their kids and offer unique parenting experience to each child, like selecting different schools that suit different children, but also like different communication styles and different time that they value spending together.
Yeah, I think it's Gabriel Mate's. It comes from like the world of trauma, I think, like trauma expert, but he says, you know, you're a different parent for every kid, but the kids are also parenting you too. So it's just how long it takes you to realize that.
100%.
Odette, I'm interested to know, in your pre-pod form, you spoke about that traditional schooling was really damn hard.
Yeah.
And that learning outside of it, so since leaving, learning outside of it has actually been a life force for you. Like, that's a really unique way to describe it. Like, it's a genuine life force. So you've realized, gone from having this a tricky time at school where you were told you're not a good learner to now you love learning. What's the difference between those two kinds of learning for you?
Well, I guess it's structured versus unstructured and self-led, right? Rather than being told what you have to learn and how you have to learn it. And I know the education system has changed so much in how things are taught these days. But, you know, like I listen to podcasts and audiobooks and chew through the internet en masse on anything that tickles my fancy and do that all day, every day. And that, you know, if I had to do a test on them, I probably wouldn't necessarily do particularly well. But it's thoroughly enjoyable. You know, like I cannot be satiated on how much cool shit there is out there that you can learn about anything. I think that classroom style learning, I really struggle with.
I'd love for you to reflect on, you said it boost juice. It was the first time you kind of like, oh, I'm actually good at this. First time you got that feeling of I'm good at something. And then you got this mentor at Westpac, Stephen Browning. Is that right?
Yes.
Steve Brown.
Steve Browning, sorry, who again sort of saw you and gave you this opportunity of being seen, but also that you were, again, worth something valuable. I'd love to know the last time you were in some kind of experience where you thought, wow, I'm really good at this.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one.
Yeah, not be too humble or not feel like you're a dick saying it, but just, when was that last time?
Well,
It can be small.
I think my relationship with Em, my business partner, is probably something that I feel like I do a pretty good job of, because she is such a joy to work with and to collaborate and play each day. Like I love working with her.
Yeah.
Can I try out one, Loz?
Go.
Is that okay? What about if you think of getting in flow? So are there certain things, are you familiar with the concept of flow, you know, where so like time can almost stop? It's this area where it's enough of a stretch, but it also is connected to your talents or your strengths. Are there some things where you get times where you get flow? And in case it helps to pad this out, is listening to you talk about M, I can relate, because one of the times I get in flow is when I go into, unsurprisingly, a really good conversation when I'm listening to someone and deep in it, and I can completely lose track of time because I'm so in the moment. And it's a moment now I just have no awareness of what's around me, but just the thing, which is very rare. My brain is normally going. So it's one of the times where I switch off and I'm just deep in the moment. But I'm fascinated to know, where do you get flow?
I like that reframe of that question. I would say all day, every day. Like, I know that probably sounds a little bit crazy, but like I genuinely love the work that we get to do, and it's so challenging and so chaotic, but so satisfying. And all day I'm talking to some of the most incredible humans who are navigating some of the most complex challenges of lived experience, but then organizations and people that are leading pathways out of that. I'm developing communication strategies for those organizations. I'm working with a team of extraordinary humans who care so unbelievably deeply. I've also built my life to be very, very structured around maintaining my mental well-being. So this morning I was walking at the lighthouse in Byron, watching dolphins jump out of the waves and seeing whales in the distance. And I was walking with one of my business best friends, talking through business challenges. Like, that's also flow state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so there's a few different things there, isn't there? So walking, being out in nature, so spotting different things where it catches you. Then there's doing the high level strategic planning, so making the different dots as well. And then there's something about engaging a team and bringing people together that in the moment that just draws you in. What do you think when you think of the listener? So they're a parent and they might be a young person going through this. If you think of the most helpful skills, so given that communications, where you've come from your own experience of school, what are the most helpful skills that you would recommend or that you think people should really focus on or draw on?
To get into the workforce or to navigate self-doubt?
I think let's go maybe workforce, I think, because they're probably going to also, all of us at some point, right, have self-doubt when we go into work, right?
Yeah.
So maybe as they move forward throughout their career, what have been the skills that you draw on or you'd recommend to really focus on and draw on?
Yeah, well, I guess like the thing that has stood me in stead throughout my career and with young people that I hire is hard work.
All right, tell us all about that, Odette. What does that look like?
It looks like a relentless capacity to keep showing up and pushing even when you're fucking up all the time. We have this extraordinary young man that works with us who applied for a role about 4 roles beyond his experience. And when I interviewed him, I knew that before going into the interview, but I loved his ambition and self-belief to just have a crack. And in chatting with him, it was just so evident that he would have no idea how to do the job. But we created a job for him because he chased me up about 5 times after that interview and offered everything under the sun of what he could do. And I feel like that approaching work in that way of like, it is such a fucking tough landscape out there for young people. Like, it terrifies me what our kids have to face going into the workforce. The education system and where we're at with AI are so horrifically out of sync now. Like, I feel like academia has been really struggling to align with the workforce for a long time, but this is just like a whole new playing field. There are entire professions and career pathways that have disappeared in the last 2 or 3 years that are all of the entry-level roles that young people would traditionally get. And the expectation on employers for what a early career person should be capable of are completely unfair. I guess, like, for young people, it is just have faith that something is going to change, that you are going to find a way through. But I think also for any parents that are listening to this podcast is that you also have so much more of a duty to help your kids get into the workforce now, that so much more so than previously. And yeah, maybe it's nepotism, employ your kids in your businesses or in the workplaces that you work in, or introduce them to people in your network, but actively play a role if your children are open to it. But I genuinely believe this is a horrific time to be a young person trying to get a job.
What are you and Tex talking about, if that's okay to ask, about setting him up for success, or what is it that you're noticing he's focusing on?
So he is very, unfortunately for us, moving to Melbourne to do an arts degree at Melbourne Uni. I would dearly love him to not do that. I'd like to be a Velcro mum and have him here forever. But for us, it was encouraging critical thinking, to have history, to have philosophy, to have an understanding of justice, and less tangible skills, which are, follow your passion and your interest. And I also think that, he's working as a kitchen hand locally, and I think like any work is great to get life experience and to build like confidence. But yeah, we'll see. I think this workforce is the beginning of change is always very confusing and unclear. And I feel like in the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're going to be sitting in a very unclear patch before people really adjust and recalibrate expectations and understand what those pathways are in for young people.
I do think that's the parents' issue more so, because I think the kids haven't lived in a different world. We have, and we have an expectation and we have a pathway that we feel is more stable. But I actually think it's the millennials and the Gen Xers that are having the hardest time, because the kids don't know any different. I remember being in year 10 in the library and the librarian telling me about Google for the first time. I didn't know any different. I didn't know an adult without it.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking to a lot of educated young people who have just finished uni or they're in uni and it's taking years to get their first foot in the door. And that's the thing that's breaking my heart, is seeing young people. And I think there is a real onus on millennials and Gen Z who are in the workforce to pull them up and pull them in and create learning opportunities and spend the money on that development, because it is really, really expensive now when you look at the comparison of having AI do a role to training someone up. And, you know, there's a real responsibility on everyone in the workforce right now to bring these young people in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, if we miss that entry level thing too, just from succession planning, eventually you're going to need people.
Absolutely.
So I think in the end, it's investing in the people too. And as listening to what you're saying, there's an interesting thing there too, which is, sounds like with you and Tex, is being aware that the jobs like working hard, being a dish hand, there's actually long-term benefits by engaging in the, you know, those part-time jobs that you're doing alongside study. You know, I worked in bars, and the best thing working in hospo and pubs, I learned how to talk to anyone. You learn these really great conversations.
Wasn't the best thing working in bars and pubs that you got to drink for free? I don't think the kids are allowed to do that anymore.
Well, look, I didn't look. Let's just say yes. Obviously, there's that, and then you can just talk to anyone. So I remember my mum saying to me, 'cause she was the same. She worked when she was studying to be a nurse. She worked in bars, and she said, no matter who it is that comes up to a bar, everyone's deserving of a drink. So the thing is, you get to meet people from all walks of life, and you get to have a chat with them, and that's a really human skill, right? In the era of AI. There's really human skills and capabilities that we're going to need to learn. If you can have conversational skills, if you can engage with people, if you can actually show up and be reliable and disciplined and do the stuff, because no job is perfect. There's stuff in every job that sucks, especially if you're a dish hand, right? But if you can do that, well, you know, you can do other things. So it actually sets you up for the long-term success that you can then draw on. But I think sometimes people, when they're in the trench doing it, they can't see that long-term view. And I think that's a powerful thing that, you know, parents or mentors or guides or whoever it is around them that can just remind them that, but there is payoff for this.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I guess it's probably opposite to what I did as a young person. But when Tex was in year 12, we actually encouraged him not to work, and we paid his wage that he was earning prior to year 12 so that he could spend more time hanging out with his friends and doing study, if that was what he wanted to do, because we found that what our way of thinking was when we were young was totally different to his way of thinking. And he took his job so seriously that he would not go out and party with his mates the night before work, because he was like, I have to work tomorrow. And I was like, you get paid to go to work and be hungover as a kid. That's what it's all about.
I love that your story is one of rebellion, and now you're dealing with a son rebelling against a rebel. So what's he done? I just got to work really, really hard, and I've got to not make sure I'm hungover and just do the right thing, Mum.
But it sounds like you know your kid.
Totally.
Like, isn't that the best thing? You know your kid, you know how their brain works, and you can sit down and go, well, here's actually another option for you based on what I know about you, which is, again, your ethos. You know your kid.
Totally.
Show up for them.
And that was a big thing for us, was that we talked about what is the value of a job. And it's about learning responsibility. It's about learning like those life skills. And he'd been working for 2 years from the ages of 16 and 17. And we just figured he's kind of like got all of that in spades. And I know he has some questions about it now, because he's like, all my mates are like, you know, further up with promotions in like hospo and all the rest. I'm like, you'll catch up. You'll be right, mate.
Odette Barry, it's been such a privilege to hear not only your pathway, but also your honesty and the openness. I think it's so refreshing to get. We love when we get people on, and the people that come on this podcast, to be able to share their story and also just engage in it too. So thank you so much for the way that you've shared. Also, all the great insights that you've shared as a mum who is going through it with a young person right now, but also yourself with your experience from school and all the way through. So thank you so much for joining us on More Than a Score.
Much appreciated, Odette.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honour to be invited to come and have a chat with you.
And I should say, if you know someone with a story or a pathway to share, Odette, feel free to pass on any details for someone that you know. But anyone listening, you can also reach out to us at morethanascorepod@gmail.com. And then Laura, we've got our socials. What's that again?
More Than a Score Pod on Instagram.
Oh, you're on to it, Laura. Thank you. Odette, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.